Jim Henson called a bunch of us together in London and said, let's come up with a kid show that would talk to children on a global level with a real message of the importance of interactivity and interconnectedness. Basically, as we like to joke ever since, he asked us to design a show that would bring about world peace. Fraggle Rock was really one of the great adventures that I think many of us who were working with Jim Henson had the real joy of embarking on. Fraggle Rock had this incredible run, but for all the fact that we had made these extraordinary advances in puppetry, that we'd taken the technology of puppetry to places that it had never been before, still has limitations. So the networks were approached and NBC was receptive, and we decided that we would reinvent these characters for animation. Fraggle Rock, when we first embarked on it, was highly experimental. If you think back to what children's television was like then, there'd never been anything even remotely like it before. I mean, what were we doing? We were creating this world that was a world within worlds within worlds. We were creating this vast array of characters. Usually you have 3 characters, maybe 5. So yes, it was extremely experimental on many, many levels. Not only, of course, on all those kind of production and technical levels, but also on the storytelling level, because I don't know that there was anyone who was really trying to address some of these critical global issues in a way for kids that we were doing on Fraggle Rock. So Fraggle Rock was winding down. It was just extraordinary what was being accomplished. And it felt like it really wasn't time to leave on many levels. These amazing characters existed. We had begun a publishing program, and so there was a whole series of really delightful books that had explored these characters further in other ways. So it seemed to be a very, very natural step to experiment again by taking these characters into the world of animation. When we moved over into animation, it was incredibly freeing. It really did allow for an explosion in terms of storytelling. These characters immediately began to propel the stories and began to propel the wonderful character moments that were so rich and so deep a part of the world of Fraggle Rock.
Wembley, stop wembling. Make up your mind and choose one.
In terms of the characters themselves, you had these 3 very, very distinct groups. The Fraggles, who are these carefree gatherers, the Doozers, and they were the industrialists and the builders. And then the Gorgs, who were these 18-foot tall giants, each of whom couldn't abide the other.
Ah! A Fraggle! Ah! A Gorg!
And all of whom were dependent on each other. The Gorgs needed the Fraggles to provide the water for their gardens. The Fraggles needed the Gorgs because without them they'd have nothing to eat. The Doozers needed both the Fraggles and the Gorgs because the radishes that grew in the Gorgs' garden provided the Doozers with their building materials. The Fraggles then ate the buildings, which gave the Doozers room to build more buildings, which was their whole raison d'etre. We use this as a vehicle for getting across to kids how important it is that we be open to differences in the world, how essential it is that we understand the interdependence of everyone and everything on the planet. And toward that end, I think we were early on in embedding some very strong ecological messages as well in the whole fabric of the show.
Madam Trash Heap, you said that today every Fraggle should take some of your garbage.
Of course I did! What for?
You said we should use it to build fantastic inventions.
One of the things that for me was really kind of a curious flip was that in doing the first show, as with any of the shows I've worked on, it really starts with an idea, and then the idea evolves into the visual. So now there was this very interesting thing of reversing that process, to take those characters that existed in 3 dimensions and reimagine them as drawings. When you're designing for a puppet, you can get pretty elaborate. Here's an early sketch for one of the minstrel characters. This is filled with texture and the potential for movement and all kinds of interesting things that happen when the body moves in terms of creases and folds and stretches and all of those things. So all those things become part of your thinking when you're putting a puppet together. When you move into animation, this is a version of that same character. Suddenly everything becomes much more simplified. Suddenly what was filled with different kinds of textures and so forth really comes down to basic shapes. And this would be like the first sketch that I would send to their animators, and from there it would be simplified even further. So it was really interesting to be able to think of how to translate our fuzzy three-dimensional characters into this world of drawing. And when you go back and you see the richness and the beauty of those drawings, there's something compelling about them that just doesn't exist in any other medium. I think when you move from one medium to another like this, and it's like, when your favorite book is adapted as a movie, there were inevitably going to be people who said, oh, well, these aren't the same Fraggles. Happily, there were many more people who really not only accepted them, but embraced them. And I'm very pleased to say that the show was doing very well. It was getting very good ratings, and it was right on the demographic that the network was looking for.
Between Gorks and Fraggles, there should be lots of peace, love, friendship, and radishes.
We didn't bring about peace in our time, as Jim had hoped. But the very fact that the show continues to resonate all this time later, I think is testament to the dream that he had and the energy that all of us put into trying to realize that. So that today, when somebody sits down and watches the show, I hope it has that same kind of relevance and resonance that it had a quarter century ago.